Just so everyone knows, I'm taking note of those people walking out the door, just to keep everyone here. Photos will be taken. But thank you everybody for joining us for this final session, I think, of the day. It's always the best time, I think, to actually present, because we get to learn from everything that's been said before us and actually come up with the best panel of the day. So. I do actually genuinely think we have the best panel of the day based on my distinguished guests that I've got here with me up today, which we'll talk about. But I'm going to talk about something myself to begin with, and then going to hand to Ranaka Ramachandran, who's the CFO of Sime Darby, and also Mohammed Irwan Aman, who's the General Manager of Sustainability at Sarawak Energy. And I think if we contemplate those two organisations in Sime Darby and Sarawak Energy, I think we would all acknowledge that the complexities in which setting a science-based target is, for both of your organisations, we have the most qualified people that we could possibly expect to have here today. So it's going to be a great session that we cover off on that. The big question I think we're probably all going to ask ourselves as we kick off on this journey is to set a target or not to set a target. That's the big question. And I think boards at the moment are thinking quite heavily around what target should we set? Should it be internal? Should we tell it externally? And if we are going to set a target, should it be one target, which might be a long-term target, a 2050 target? Should we set an interim target? If we set an interim target, what should it look like? Those are the types of questions that are coming out at the board level and really driving action for people like us in the sustainability world and those even as CFOs, actually setting out how am I actually going to achieve the outcomes that I'm setting in my target setting. The other question that we often get from boards is, well, what target should I set? What's the basis of the target that I'm going to set? Is it based on what I think I can achieve? Is it based on what my peers are doing? Or is it based on what is actually necessary for us to deliver against the goals that we're setting out? And I'm going to mount a case to begin with on why the Science-Based Target Initiative is all about that last point of the target setting. It's about setting a target that actually will help us collectively achieve the goals that we need to do in the climate change space. And I think we would all acknowledge that that's really what the outcome is that we're looking for. So there's a little bit here about a couple of points that I'll make around why we set a target. And the reality is there's lots of actually different data points, lots of research that's been done that actually points to the fact that if you do set a target and you seek to achieve it, the outcomes to your business are positive. I would get this question, and I think maybe you might actually answer this when I get to it a little bit later, whether you've had it from your boards. I get this question all the time. If I set my target and I achieve it, and my investors think it's a good target and they recognise it, am I going to see a benefit in my share price next week from my target setting exercise? And I think that I often remind boards that the reality of that is that it's way too specific to be actually able to underpick that. But if you actually think about the benefits of what drives us to set targets and actually achieve them across our business, you'll see that this type of research is the reasons why we actually do set the target in the first place. I did also hear just before when I was talking to someone in the break, and they made the comment that I think we're past the business case setting process for climate change and we're now into the actions phase. So I'm actually going to skip over this slide now very quickly because we can get to the point of why we actually set the target and then the how of how we set the target. So what is a science-based target and what is a science-based target? What is the Science-Based Target Initiative? So a science-based target is built on this concept of we have a budget of greenhouse gas emissions that we can put into the atmosphere in order to keep warming to 1.5 degrees or around 1.5 degrees by 2050, and that budget is finite. The amount of emissions that we can actually put out into the atmosphere is finite. That's really set by science. The scientists have told us what that budget is and the subsequent warming that delivers. What's up to us in this room is how do we then allocate out that target to everybody in the world? How do we allocate it to Asia, to the US, to Europe? How do we then allocate it within Asia to Malaysia, to Singapore, to China? And then within Malaysia, how do we then allocate it to Sime Darby, to Sarawak Energy, to Ernst & Young? That's the concept of this science-based target cascade, which is we have a budget, we need to allocate it out, and we need to set targets that when we aggregate that all up, we will achieve the 1.5 degrees, restricting warming to 1.5 degrees. So the Science-Based Target Initiative is effectively a centralised organisation that helps aggregate that and then pushes out to organisations to say, this is what we think your target should be, based on where you are, your sector, your opportunities for reductions, so that when we can aggregate them all together, they will deliver the 1.5 degrees. I say it pretty simply, right? That sounds like a pretty simple exercise to do. But if you think about how many corporations there are in the world, those that do have targets, those that don't have targets, it's extremely complicated. And we're going to hear a little bit more from both of you, hopefully in a minute, about the process of why that becomes complicated for your two organisations. So the Science-Based Target is the concept. The Science-Based Target Initiative is the organisation that seeks to aggregate and the person that we engage with through the process, and they have defined rules around setting those targets. So when you commit to a Science-Based Target Initiative target, there are a number of steps that you have to go through, some of which you will do in your own organisation and some of which you need to do alongside the SBTI. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail today, but suffice to say that that exercise is quite challenging and it takes a lot of effort. And unfortunately, not all of the stakeholders and participants in that process are as well resourced as the organisations which are seeking to get the target in the first place. So it can be a lengthy journey, and I'm going to hear how best to navigate through that journey in a minute. The last point I will say is that under SBTI, the whole point about going through the exercise with this centralised organisation is to enable you to communicate and disclose your target and then hold your organisation to account to achieving those targets. I had an interesting conversation today as well with another person who said to me that, when we set our interim target under the SBTI, we started the process expecting that we were only going to tell our internal people about this particular target. And when we did that, we got some buy-in from our internal people, and we started to feel like there was some progress, but not great progress. What they then said is the way that we really ramped up that focus internally was we went to market. And when we went external with that target, everyone internally within the organisation shifted their mindset. It suddenly became real for them, and they didn't want to be part of an organisation that didn't achieve the target that they'd been set out externally. So I think this concept of communication and disclosure is really important to drive action external to your organisation, but also internally within your organisation, and mobilise your people behind it. So there's a lot of very specific requirements associated with the Science-Based Target Initiative target. I have 2 minutes left to go, so I'm definitely not going to go through all of these requirements, but we're going to hear a little bit about them from the practical terms about how we actually implement them. But they are complex because the nature of target setting is complex. We heard a little bit in the transition plan session before around the complexities about setting a transition plan, but remember that the transition plans should be consistent with the targets that you set within your organisation, and your transition plans need to be able to get you to achieving those targets. But are those targets for your own organisation that you have control over, Scope 1, Scope 2? Are they for Scope 3 emissions, in which you have some influence upstream, but maybe less influence downstream? Do they include all your contractors, not your contractors? What parts of the boundaries we know is very complicated and will take a lot of effort and thinking. The benefit of doing this exercise, though, is you learn an awful lot, and you learn about all the parts of your value chain. We had an organisation that we helped through a process of setting an SBTI, and interestingly, the first step that we went into that organisation, we said, could you give us your value chain? Show us your mapped value chain for your organisation so we can have a look at where emissions might sit within that value chain. Surprisingly, they didn't have one. And so the first step in that exercise actually was for us to map their value chain for them, which elicited a whole lot of information that helped them set targets for their SBTI, but also helped them set strategy for their business and actually determine their actions and activities. So the good news is that there's lots of organisations within Malaysia that have already started this journey, so you won't be alone if you're looking to start, and if you have already undertaken and kicked off the process, you have others that you can learn from. But we are seeing really a proliferation across our region, which I call Asia Pacific, but also here in ASEAN and also here in Malaysia, of people looking to set SBTI type targets and actually then seek to deliver against them. And this is happening all over the world. And so it's a real push in terms of organisations looking to undertake this. This does create some challenges with SBTI themselves, which again we'll hear about in a minute. But what this also kind of does tell us, if your organisations haven't at least started and considered this as a journey, they're probably starting to fall behind. And so I would strongly encourage you to kickstart this process to say, does this make sense for us? How will we go about it? If it doesn't make sense for us to go through a SBTI process, challenge yourself on your target setting that you've already done within your organisation and whether it is going to actually drive significant change within your organisation. Because as I mentioned yesterday in my panel session, ISSB standard is coming, S2 disclosures are coming, and investors are going to start to compare you on a business by business as you're required to report your metrics and targets under an S2 regime, and they're going to start to compare you between those organisations. So more good news. There's lots of guidance for you to actually start on this process. These are the documents that you can look to online to go and have a look about how you would go about the process. But I think the best way to learn is to hear from people who have done it before. So with that, I'm actually going to ask our panel now to give a brief overview, and we're going to start with Renaka, who's going to give us a bit of a journey on how they've gone through at Sime Darby to the process of setting net zero and what that means in an SBTI process. And then we'll hear from Irwan, who's going to take us through a little bit more on the technical details of the SBTI process specifically. So, Renaka, I pass to you. Please.
I'll stand. I've got notes. Yeah. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's basically us before you leave for the day. But I do hope that I'll be able to share some of the challenges, pains, and I would say learnings that we've had over the time in our journey towards net zero. So, as a CFO, you might be thinking it's rather odd that I'm speaking to you today. But other than the fact that it's like my passion, I wouldn't say I'm a technically strong person as far as this is concerned. But at the end of the day, this is what the whole world's speaking about, and it's about time that we get up to speed, yeah? So, this might seem to be very obvious to most of you here, and the expectation that is of companies, we are listed obviously, and that of our shareholders. So let me share with you. As far as our investors and shareholders are concerned right now, and when I do say an investor round these days, especially the foreign investors, and we've got quite a significant bidder, so about 11% of our shareholders are foreign. I will be very lucky if I even get one question on financials in Europe. Every single question is about sustainability, and it's like the gate and the license to do business, yeah? So it's something that not only me, the organization has encountered over the years. It's developing slowly, but moving very, very speedily. As far as customers are concerned, we are the largest suppliers to most of the FMCGs, and hence, again, a license to do business, yeah? Government and regulators, you would already be familiar. Regulations are changing by the day. We spoke about ISSB just now, and the requirements of disclosures as well as compliance just gets tighter and tighter. So what was our decarbonization journey? So as far as Sime is concerned, and I'm only going to talk about net zero, so the sustainability journey is like very long, yeah. So anyway, As far as net zero is concerned, way back in 2012, we disclosed for the first time in our annual report the baseline emissions that were based on a baseline of 2009, and it only covered Scope 1 and Scope 2. I don't think we had any understanding of Scope 3 at that point of time, yeah? Over the years, as part of our decarbonization strategy, many other agendas were covered, including NDPE, commitments to NDPE, as well as traceability. So in 2019, we actually launched a system that could trace our oil palm right up to the mill and to a certain extent to the areas surrounding where the oil, the fruits come from, yeah? So I'll fast forward. There are many other agendas, many other investments that have been made in solar, in biogas, as well as plantings. Just one thing to note, in 2021, just want to spend a bit of time here, in relation to an agreement that we entered into with Nestle Malaysia, and it was to plant 1 million trees. And this was quite interesting to us because Nestle is a client. We worked with them towards planting 1 million trees over 3 years. That reduced our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. They paid for it, yeah? We just take care of it after that. But the other thing was we ensured, or they ensured, that the fruits and the oil that they bought could be traced via the supply chain from the very same estates, right to the mill, right to the refineries, and hence the reduction of Scope 3 emissions for Nestle. So that was a partnership very early in Malaysia that assisted in a collaboration of sorts. So what's our progress right now? As far as SBTi is concerned, we have made our submissions to SBTi. It's been reviewed and it's at the board stage in relation to approval. So we should be hearing from them pretty soon to have it validated. So, as far as the carbon emission baseline is concerned, just a little bit about our supply chain. And in relation to our business itself, we are in the plantation business, and it's from cradle to grave, yeah? So we plant our own trees, we mill the fruits, and we refine the oil before it's sold to third-party customers, which are both in the form of bulk or specialized products. At the same time, outside our own subsystem, you'll find that we do purchase from third parties, both in the form of fruits, oil, or other forms of products, and of course, you know, your Scope 2 items. So you see a little note of end of life. That was our issue in relation to computing the combusting of end of life for biodiesel and waste generation. So that was one of our greatest challenges when we did our emission calculation. So what was our approach? In terms of external engagements, we did appoint a third-party advisor. In this particular case, it was EY. We set up an internal team in relation to ensuring that we had a team that is represented from all across the organization. It was mentioned earlier that the entire organization has to be on the same page. That is so true. And the oversight for our entire SBTi submission was actually the Sustainability Committee itself. And the final submissions was approved by the board. And we had a whole project steerco that met monthly, and then 2 weekly, and then weekly, as things got heated up, I would say. But really, it represented people from across the organization. So there was a common understanding. But ladies and gentlemen, nothing beats the fact that you must feel. You must feel that you're doing the right thing. You must believe in it, and it cannot be a tick box exercise. So that, I think, is what, that's how we jump the hurdle. It's really about getting the entire organization involved and believing in the process. So our process, I won't go through in detail, but really it's about reviewing the emission inventories, doing the gap analysis. Even though we may have had a baseline in 2009, we revisited it, updated it for 2020, and then over time identified what were the risk involved, as well as climate scenarios. By the way, for the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years, we have been disclosing the qualitative impact to TCFD in our annual reports. So, and GHG protocol requirements have also been disclosed. So to a certain extent, there was a lot of work already done, but surprises were aplenty. These had to be addressed. Very interesting, as I said, a learning process, and a lot of last-minute shocks, if you could call it. But anyway, again, as I said, it was something that needed to be addressed. So then we worked on the qualitative scenarios, and one of our greatest issues was actually because we are land-based, and with climate risk, there is, many of you may know of Carey Island, where we've got a huge plantation, like 80% of the island is plantations of Simlabi plantation, and there are rising waters. So there's climate risk, and what is then the impact? So you can have your qualitative, but what is the quantitative impact, and what are the mitigations that we have in place? So this was like one of our greatest challenges as well. And hence, at the end of the day, the net zero roadmap was then established. What are the challenges and ways of improvement? Data management, data. And given our size, oh, by the way, before I forget, we did this globally. It was not just Malaysia-based, it was globally. So we are huge landowners in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. And hence bringing everyone to date and consolidating that information was at different levels of detail, yeah? So, as I said, data was something that we needed to ensure that it was relatively comparable. And also then in relation to improvement initiatives and value chain emissions. Not all our suppliers obviously have emission targets that have been established or even calculated on a comparable level. So assumptions needed to be arrived at and hence calculated, yeah? So again, the other thing is interpreting the guidelines. It was quite new, and in our case, as we were about to submit, we were aware that the flag guidelines were coming out, and hence it did come out. Our SBTI stopped all submissions until you had amended this to reflect the new flag guidelines. And because it was new, there were interpretation issues that had to be handled, but as I said, challenges will always be handled. And where the improvement initiatives are concerned, as far as interpreting guidelines, not only did we consult, I think there was a lot of upskilling done within the internal team as well to complete the task, yeah? So finally, what's the outcome of our net zero roadmap? So basically, this is our roadmap. We've got our scope 1 and 2 emissions, as well as the scope 3 emissions disclosed here. And you will note that about 40% or 40% of our scope 3 emissions, 40% of all emissions are scope 3 in nature. This does not include the sequestration. So these are just like the gross emissions here. And so what's our pathway towards 2030 and towards 2050? As you can see, I'll just touch on a few matters. Firstly, we talk about acceleration and expansion of renewables. For SIMW plantation, one of the greatest items is the methane ponds that we have in the oil mills. So that's basically your scope 1 emission. And really, it's about handling it via renewables. Biogas plants will be built in almost every mill, at least covering 80% of our mills over time. And in terms of land use transformation, we have since set aside 5,000 hectares, which is a lot, for replanting or reforestation of some form or other. So this is something new that has just been done this year in relation to handling land use transformation. But again, the elephant in the room is our peatland, and this is where we are relying potentially on future technology in terms of improvement, yeah? So one other thing in terms of scope 3 is supplier engagement. That will be continuous, and over time, we expect to be fully traceable to the plantations itself to be able to calculate the emissions properly. So 2030, the pathway is quite clear. 2050, it's clear, but there's a lot of work to be done to achieve that. So with that, how do we go about doing it? How do we ensure sustenance? So just as we have targets that have been set, this is then translated to both corporate KPIs and individual KPIs, as well as individual companies within the group. It need not be the same, but an analysis is then done as to what is appropriate for each company. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renaka. I like the comment of get every part of your organisation involved and believe in it. It was a great objective. Mr. Irwin, we'd love to hear from you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Assalamu alaikum and very good evening, everyone. So being the last one to present is kind of pressure to me to just speed it up to complete things. Okay, I think just for introductions, we are power utilities in Sarawak. So we are Sarawak Energy. We are basically integrated electricity companies involved in generation, project development, transmission, up to distribution and retailing. So our vision is to achieve sustainability growth and prosperity for Sarawak by meeting regional needs for RE, renewable energy, reliable energy, as well as affordable energy. That's our vision. So this is a standard slides that I have to cover just to introduce Sarawak Energy to every one of you. So on the left, for example, one of our KPI, there is a motto in Sarawak Energy: whatever we do, we try to maximize the impact, positive impact of our operation and minimize the negative impacts. So one of the indicators will be the rural electrification. So one of our key KPI is to get 100% electrification for Sarawak in 2025. That's just okay. And our ambition is basically to become regional powerhouse. So this is where is it everything coming in. To become regional player, you need to change the mindset. We need to operate at international best practices. We are not listed company. Okay, being a not listed company, it is important for us to have our own internal guidance, be it on social, be it on climate change, and so on. and try to anticipate what is it out there, okay? Expectation of our Sukuk investors, expectation from our client, future clients, and so on. We need to anticipate and anticipate. So that's why our journey toward SBTI is coming from here. The vision up to what we do, up to the operation level. Okay, this is again our ambitions. Basically, in 2023, 2025, we want to become among the front runner with Sime Darby, with Azeta, and so on. All right. So by activating our that's what happened in the beginning here. Almost activating our strategy. Okay. We have a long-term strategy. So it's already been approved last year. So we need to activate it and and implement it. And from strategy up to implementation, we need to have a proper governance. We need to have a proper measurement and so on. So all this will be activated within 2023 to 2025, building the fundamental, and then having a clear roles within the whole corporates, elevate ESG in decision making, closing gaps, because I think most of you knows that 70% of our energy coming from hydro. Again, hydro having several legacy issues. We need to really manage and develop our hydro at international standards that meet sustainability requirements, and then accelerate capacity development within Sarawak Energy, from the top to our staff on the ground, and communicating our reporting. So this is the strategy that we're going to embark from 2023 to 2025. So again, these are the frameworks that we adopted. I will not touch in details, but what you can see here, the enablers toward the end, far right, the right one. So again, if you're talking about SBTI, it's always about data. Concur with Reneka and Matt. They're saying about data. It's about data. So we are struggling in the first phase of our journey in SBTI. Okay. Although we start early, for scope 1 and scope 2 should not be an issue for us. But when it comes to scope 3, then we're facing all these issues. Where to find emission factors that represent energy sectors within this country. So it's so difficult. So we, again, back and forth with SBTI. So hopefully within this year, we get our targets validated. So again, how we push through these requirements throughout the company. Again, this is the one that I mentioned to you, Sustainability Strategy and Roadmap 2022 to 2025. We don't park climate action in climate action itself. So climate action, SBTI is basically under sustainable growth. Right? Because we know that this will be a future requirement. I think you heard about CBAM, most of our bulk customer exporting to Europe, then that's one of the requirements. And then NDC requirement, we know that that will be cascade down to the banks already, and then from the banks to us, for example, the borrower. So this is how we see SBTI or science-based targets requirement. We put it under sustainable growth. Okay, it's important for us to understand where we are at this moment. Okay, since our journey toward renewable energy, if you can see from 2010 to 2021, drop in our emission intensity, 72%, more than 70%. So it's due to the renewable energy. But where we are against Paris Agreement targets, so it's between 2 to 1.5. So the management ambition is to push it below 1.5 degrees C. So how are we going to do it? That's why it is important to us to have a targets, and from targets, we know what we need to do in the future. Okay? The most important, the most easiest narrative that we communicate to our internal team, don't just look climate change as a climate change. Okay? One of the driver is our investors, for sure. Another driver is from risk perspective. Okay? Some of the operation guy thinks climate change is just environmental issues. No, it's not environmental issues only. Okay? It's about risk. It's about risk. If you look at how increase of ambient temperature improve the efficiency in power generation, there are impact to our power generations. How that impact to the efficiency in generating power, there are impact. Sea level rise, how it impact us, and then changing of weather patterns. Okay, weather pattern change, when it change, it's not only on the supply side, but also on the demand side, our customer. Okay, when I think everyone knows that we record the highest temperature, ambient temperature this year. I think I can't remember the figures, but definitely that will change the behavior of our customers. Okay, everyone start on their aircon and so on, how that impact us. So we need to look at both supply and demand side. Again, this is also involves scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Okay, we publish our SBTi emission targets, intensity for scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. But for scope 3, we only have one category validated. Scope 1 and 2, we already validated. We have a third party to assure it. But scope 3, we only have one category, which is business travel. The rest of the category, we need to work up. Okay, this is our scope 3. Again, the one that I highlighted, only one, we're having third-party assurance. The rest of it, 10. We are using spend-based methodology. Then we have one, purchase goods and services. We have initiative just started to categorize our suppliers. From there, either we go to product specific or we go to market average. That will be next year. We would like to deep dive into that. And then 3 categories is not relevant to us: franchising, downstream lease asset, and upstream lease asset. That's not relevant to us. So again, these 15 categories, although it's quite small as compared to scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, but the most headache will be under this scope 3. Right? How are we going to talk to our vendors? How are we going to capture the data? How to ensure consistency in terms of data or accuracy of the data? Okay, this is unvalidated figures we submitted to the SBTi. What you can see in terms of scope 1, 77% coming from scope 1, which is involved power generation. Scope 2 is very small. It's only 0.2%. But scope 3 is around 22%, just plus minus 0.1, 0.2. This is where we are at this moment. Again, I just like to stress, when we did the first screening of scope 3, our emission is for almost to 36 point something percent, nearly close to the 40% threshold. But that's due, we are using the Quantis tool, which is very high level. The accuracy is not there. But now we are using most of it emission factors from LCOS, from MGTC. So we find that the emission factors quite reasonable in terms of doing assessment. So this is what we submitted. And then from here, once we have the target, we're still using the draft targets in communicating with our management. So we know what we're going to do. Near terms, 2030 or net zero 2050. For example, role of increasing renewable energy, how that will impact efficiency, adaptation for us as a business. Okay, we have huge catchment area, whether we can turn that into nature-based, for example. We need to identify that, and we need to look at that as well for our commitment. All right, as for my conclusion, actually I have 1 minute left. So for my conclusion, the climate action or science-based targets we should not just look at as a climate change. In fact, it is an additional driver for companies to improve their operation excellence, to improve their productivity, to improve their efficiency and innovation. So whenever you improve all this, that will contribute to the science-based targets. Okay? So again, that will contribute to business resilience, contribute to future-proofing of the business or going concern of the business. So I think that's the points that I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. Well, the good news is we've got lots of questions coming through, so this will be an interesting panel. But if you haven't yet had a chance to ask a question you would like to, I am checking the Slido, which is, as I've been sitting up here, I've been watching the questions come through. So feel free to do one of two things: actually ask your own question and put that into Slido, but also if you have looked at the questions that are in there and you think one of the questions you would like an answer to, you can also vote for it, which will put it up the list in my list here. So one of the questions that has come through that I'm going to kick off with relates to current performance against target. I think we heard both of you have relatively recently gone through the SBTI process, but interested to hear how you feel you're tracking against your targets. Has it been a process of set the target and then move on, or are you continuing to monitor progress and how are you going? Has it actually resulted in some change within your organisations? Maybe Renaka, I'll start with you.
So after setting the targets, and it's very public, we obviously have got annual emission reduction, stuff like that. The oversight of a task force is still there to ensure that the movement and reduction is in accordance with plan. Like everything else, I'm sure standards keep changing, and hence, for all you know, calculations will change. It's now at 1.5 degrees. Who knows, by 2030 it's 2 degrees. I wouldn't know. So as we go along, I think we adjust as we go along. But at least for the next 3 years, the plans are crystal clear. And as I said, 2030 is very achievable.
And actually, a follow-on question to that was, have you set absolute or emissions intensity targets in your process, and are you tracking them similarly?
Yes, we have.
Both?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Excellent, thank you. Owen?
Yeah, I think definitely we need to communicate, we need to disclose the performance. Only then, number one, to build trust in the data, create discussion about that as well. Again, we committed to get our figures to be assured by third party. I think that's building the credential, building the trust about the data, and that would be easier. And even turn that into our KPI, for example, for each of the departments. So then there will be a very clear measurement on progress for SBTI. Thank you.
Yeah, great point. And I think there is a specific requirement in S2 actually also to identify whether executives have remuneration attached to outcomes in your targets. A bit more of a technical question here, which is, can you share your experience in preparing greenhouse gas data for verification through SBTI flag? Can either of you answer that question? So how have you gone through the verification process of putting forward your SBTI information?
Yeah, basically how we prepare for it, we are a bit lucky because we start quite early. I think similar to SIME, they start in 2012. We are starting 2014 in publishing our sustainability report. Starting from that year, 2014, we keep track of our Scope 1 and Scope 2. We get it assured because, again, accuracy is important. We need to manage the uncertainty. If the uncertainty is quite high, then... But I think now the process is stabilized, so we have confidence on how we measure it, how we calculate it, and how we report it. So that's for Scope 1, Scope 2. For Scope 3, again, I have to be honest, we just started last year because once we embark into science-based targets, because we need to do screening, okay? For companies, if their emission is below 40%, we don't have to put targets. But for submission, we need to screen. Then that's where we really seriously look into the screening of our Scope 3. Right? So again, that's a whole lot of back and forth on the data and try to make logics of the calculations. I think that's the preparation for us in embarking into SBTI.
Thank you. Question for you, Renaka. We've got a few questions that have come through that identify that today we've spoken a lot about climate-related targets, and obviously that's the basis of the Science-Based Target Initiative, that they are climate-related. But a question, I'll wrap a few of these points up in there in relation to, obviously SIME has a number of challenges in the sustainability space around things like human rights, and I know that's one of your areas of expertise, but also in things like environmental impact, deforestation, and those sorts of things. Do you think the SBTI process and going through that for the purposes of climate has assisted in how you look at other metrics across your business? Has it had no impact? Or has it almost been distracting from that, and therefore you've had to put a disproportionate amount of effort into those parts of the sustainability journey?
Not really. I think it's complementary.
Great.
So I wouldn't say that it has put extra focus. I know I see the question on human rights and forced labor indicators. I think that to us was left field, yeah. But the point is it's been addressed, and safe to say that we are probably the only one that has been reviewed for forced labor indicators and gotten through. So it's not about SBTI reviewing other indicators or anything like that, but I think it's about your stakeholders, your investors, your customers. They expect to see the entire spree. It's not just SBTI, or it's not just environment. So deforestation, for example, you mentioned deforestation, and unfortunately, palm is relatively tied to the deforestation and orangutan issues. SIME as a standalone has never been put in the same basket, largely because we've had a deforestation policy from going back to the 1980s, yeah? So I suppose the challenges will always be there. Tomorrow it might be a new challenge. We never know, but as I said before, we handle it as it comes.
Thank you. I think that's a good answer. Hopefully, yeah, complementary, I think, is the right word, that they're not distracting, and the exercise that you go through can be relevant for all parts of your business. Question for you, Owen. There's a question here around, could you share some of the challenges of ramping up the development of renewable energy in Malaysia, i.e. bureaucracy of state and federal governments? That's going to be an interesting answer to that one. But I'd like to add on a little bit to that question to make it relevant from an SBTI perspective. In the context of those challenges, have you found that having your target and actually being public about your target, has that helped drive the business to continue and persist with achieving those goals that you set, despite the barriers that you get from external stakeholders?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, whatever we disclose, that facilitate discussion. Again, our states already announced they're going for net zero. Again, they're looking at us, how they're going to achieve it, whether our plan and their plan aligns or not. So I think it's open now on the net zero from state of Sarawak, talking about green hydrogen. How are we going to achieve that requirements of green hydrogens for RE? All this, a lot of discussion within us in SCB, and sometimes we feel that it's quite difficult for us to cope because a lot of requirement coming in. But then again, it's very exciting now. It's interesting phase for us, especially in sustainability. Yeah, I think I just would like to add on the one that mentioned about the impacts on the social and environmental part of it. Again, SBTI facilitate even the standards that we committed to in terms of hydropower development and operations. There are several climate-related requirements under that standards. For example, the power density need to meet certain requirement. And the emissions, the life cycle emission of our projects that we're going to develop need to meet the low carbon generation, which is 100 gram per kilowatt hour. So that's the requirement. So again, everything interlinked to each other. So we need to put this requirement in the project design as well. Only then we fulfill the standards requirement. For us, we are committed to see for all our hydropower projects to be certified. For existing one up to the one that going to be developed. Yep. And then under these standards, all this indigenous requirement, UN DRIP, FPIC requirement is inside there as well. So there's a lot of requirements that we need to fulfill on that one. Regardless, it's not about how big or how small is the projects. It's about whether the projects has been developed in a sustainable manner. How we quantify that? By standard, by certification. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That's a great answer. Interesting question here around sustainable finance and the potential for Simon. The question is for you, Renaka, or for Simon, but I think it's equally relevant for Sarawak in some ways too. Do you think the SBTI target has enabled you, or have you explored whether you can then use that as a basis for seeking sustainable finance under some sort of sustainability-linked loan or potentially some sort of sustainability bond?
Definitely, but this has been an ongoing discussion with financiers, whether it is in the form of a sustainable bond of any form, but more importantly, working on projects, even with financiers. I'll give you an example. I spoke about Nestle just now. Similarly, financiers being, there are a couple of bankers who are working with us in marrying us with their customers so that the supply chain for the bank gets cleaner too. So what happens is, we are quite insistent that it has to be our supply chain as well. So it's quite, SBTI will help there because it is a validated target and continued assurance year on year.
Erwin, have you got to?
Yeah, we have seen growing numbers of requirements of our clients or our investors coming in, or our new clients. They're putting all this requirement in. I think now in terms of the taxonomy of it, I think in the future there will be a certain numbers will be put into the taxonomy. Okay, whatever projects that we're going to develop need to fulfill this requirement. All right, with ASEAN taxonomy will be in the picture. So for us, again, we need to anticipate, prepare early, so that once, of course, everything now is not compliance, it's more on the conformance, where you put your own targets and you comply with your own targets and try your best to achieve it. Yes, SBTI will assist in engaging with our investors or financer. Thank you.
Great, thank you. A couple of questions have come through around greenwashing, and it's obviously a very hot topic, I think, in this region in particular, around making sure that when targets are set and then subsequently disclosed, that it doesn't, it isn't seen as greenwashing. Interested in your thoughts as to how do you ensure you set a target that you can stand behind and say this isn't greenwashing and you're comfortable with it? How do you involve stakeholders in that process? Have you actually engaged with stakeholders to challenge those target setting? And does SBTI help in that process of ensuring that you're comfortable that the target setting isn't greenwashing? Sorry, that's 3 questions in one, Renaka, so feel free to answer. Oh.
Yeah. So maybe just greenwashing's not new to the plantation industry. We are 100% certified as far as our oil is concerned, sustainable oil. But in days of the past, certificates were also sold, and it became very common that even our certificates were purchased by customers. So that's something we don't do now. We avoid trying to sell certificates. It's only the physical goods. But in terms of the targets and whether it's greenwashing, we're not selling it for carbon. That's basically it.
Yep.
So.
One?
Yeah, I think it's a big topic about greenwashing and so on. So I think it's important, again, data, Secondly, to get someone reputable assurer to assure the data, starting from how we capture it and how it's being captured at corporate level, and disclose it. So then people can have a look at your data and they can provide feedback. Maybe certain angles we fail to see and so on. I don't know, but they can put up their grievances or their comment to us lah, for example. Yeah.
So follow-up question to that actually has come through around whether you involved NGOs or other stakeholders in your target setting. Erwan, is that something that you did? Did you talk to local communities, broader NGOs?
For target setting, again, for SBTI, it's mainly on the hard data. We have yet to, we don't involve a third party or beyond Sarawak Energy. Our main involvement with them is basically setting the materiality analysis and so on. So once we identified the targets, then we work backward and looking at who are the stakeholders involved in achieving this, for example, our SME and so on, and what sort of programs we can develop with them. Thank you.
Renaka, what about you?
So in terms of the SBTI submission itself, it was quite reliant on data, and third parties were probably third parties that were in our supply chain rather than anything else. But from a certification angle, communities are engaged in that sort of thing, especially in Indonesia and PNG.
Great, thank you. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I would like to give you both the opportunity to kind of have one last comment before we close. So I'm going to take the opportunity, because I've got the microphone, I get to ask the last question. So I've got a double-barrel question for the two of you that specifically relates to SBTI. Given that you've already been through the process, you've all got it either approved or in train, if I asked you, would you do it again, what would you say? Was the first question. And also, what has been the most surprising thing that you've taken out of having the SBTI that has really helped you in drive action within your businesses? Maybe I'll start with you, Owen. Would you do it again?
Honest answer, yes. You know what? We don't have any ideas because, again, for our SBTI development, we are doing it internally. Okay, we don't engage consultants. I have my core team here, Dayang Shida, who is really focusing on SBTI. It's learning by doing, because we know that the values goes back to us, right? So if you ask me, if you do it again, definitely now we are better. So definitely instead of taking 1 year, we are taking less than 6 months, for example, because we understand the requirement. And honestly, now it's very easy for us to communicate with our SMB, for example, what we want from each one of you, how to measure, okay, what sort of data that we want from you. So it's just the whole process is basically create an understanding how to measure our emissions from scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. The most difficult one, scope 3. So honestly, now we are very clear. This is how it should be calculated, the upstream, downstream, well to tank. All these emissions should be coming in. So now we are very clear. Again, yes, it's quite a tedious process, but hopefully that will not deter if any SME here. But the whole process, honestly, build the understanding, build the confidence within the corporation. And then for us to really bring it forward, to say, okay, next year we have this KPI for Sarawak Energy, we need to have 50 vendors or 100 vendors. We need to work on this emission because we are clear. The understanding is very clear on the SBTI requirement. So that's where we are at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Renaka, would you do it again?
I think we'll have no choice. That's the demand of the stakeholders.
Was that a no? That sounded a little bit like a no. But.
No, I think I mentioned it just now as I speak. You must have the passion, you must have the belief, and I think we are bought in on both. I don't say I think, we are bought in on both. So will we do it again? Yes. And we'll have no choice but to do it again, because I do believe the first round of calculations are just baselines, and it will be an ever-changing world before we reach 2050.
Thank you so much. Well, I must say, for everyone in the room, it's been a real pleasure to have both of you talk about your organisations in such an open way. So can you all please join me in thanking Erwan and Ranaka for their presentations today.